Hello together. How does a lecture on key trumpet find place at the Romantic Brass Symposium, since the key trumpet is known to be associated with classical music, with Haydn and Hummel? The research of Jaroslav Rucek, Sabine Klaus, Robert Apple and myself, among others, has shown that this type of instrument was still in use long into the middle of the 19th century. When we deal with the key trumpet today, we naturally approach it with the knowledge and experience of today's trumpeters. But today, I would like to try to approach the matter from the perspective of a trumpeter from the beginning of the 19th century, as well as my personal experience with and my ideas about the key trumpet. When I started to work with the key trumpet almost 40 years ago, I made some mistakes. First, I made a fingering chart by try and error instead of trying to understand the instrument. Second, I took my cue from the sound of the modern trumpet instead of imagining how trumpet players played the trumpet around 1800 and how the instrument might have sounded originally. Third, I tried modern and a Baroque mouthpiece instead of reading the old sources, even though I should know that the mouthpiece is crucial for the sound and playing style of the key trumpet. A trumpeter around 1800 has been trained on the natural trumpet and had learned the art of bending the note. I like more to speak of driving the note, because of bending is no work and driving is a lot of power. This is a skill we have relearned today, also on the key trumpet, as on the hand-stop trumpet. It was now suddenly possible to play the notes between the natural harmonics. It was still necessary to correct intonation problems. Two questions arise for me here. How did the instrument sound when a key opens a hole? Were the trumpeters trying to compensate the sound difference? We've heard something from Annika's lecture this morning. And why are some notes in the existing fingering tables notated as natural harmonics, although they are not in tune and could easily be played in tune with a key? Of course, we do not know what the key trumpet sounded like around 1800 and how it was played. But there are some indications that suggest that composers and musicians at that time quite consciously used the supported weakness of the unequal keyed notes as stylistic element. Here are two examples. We see the beginning of the solo part of the Haydn concerto. The scale is C, D, E, F, G. If we play it on a key trumpet without changing the way of playing, so what comes out of the instrument is more like this. Several hundred kilometers north of Vienna, in Bitterfeld in Saxony, 1 year before the composition of the Haydn concerto, Johann Ernst Altenburg published his book Versuch einer Anleitung. We all may know this book. On page 97, Altenburg writes how to play a scale. That's a very good trick. Obvious, this articulation corresponded with the taste of the time, the way one should play. Did Haydn consciously use this articulation with different loud notes and different sounding notes? I think so. Another example, in the third movement of the same concerto, Haydn writes the following passage. In measure 69, we have on 2 a syncopation on a B flat. if you play this, it's bum pa pa da da pa 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 da da pa da da dum pa pa da da. This syncopation needs more loudness. It is louder because of it's a closed note. It's a note without a key. I'm of the opinion that the use of keys gives the trumpet a special color, and that the composers, at least in the first years around 1800, used this consciously. We know the same effect from the natural horn with the hand-stopping technique. Thanks, Anneke. Another question is whether the trumpeter mastered the technique of bending or driving notes into tune and were able to balance critical note and thus play clearly. Some facts speak for this idea. For example, in all known fingering charts of the seventh partial, the B flat is notated with the key closed, although, as we know, this note is too low as a natural and can easily be played with the third key open. The tone is then perfectly easy to play in tune. Here you can see two fingering charts where the sign is below. Then there you can see that the B flat, in German it's a B, there is no fingering. And on the other one, the one is Prentice, the other is Roy. Another example, in the first movement of Concerto by Hummel, a low F sharp is called for in bar 141, a note that's not normally possible to play on the key trumpet. You can see the low notes. The F sharp is not on the key trumpet, so you have to lip it down. Even stranger is the fingering chart for the key trumpet in C in some various editions, method books. There, the same fingering is used for two neighbor notes, D and E flat, with a third key. You can see it here in the low register for C, the C trumpet. You have a D finger 3, and the E flat also finger 3. We can assume that the musicians who played the early key trumpet still mastered the technique of driving that was necessary for natural trumpet of the 18th century. This has, I think, had an effect on the number of keys, so also on how the early trumpets looked like, the early key trumpets looked like. In a note, if a note played with an open key was not quite clean, the intonation could be compensated. To play a chromatic scale from low C, the fourth natural, only 3 keys are needed. Also for the Concerto by Haydn, 3 keys are sufficient. Even the low A flat in the first movement is played with the first key. These are all notes you have to play in the Haydn concerto. We do not know how Weidinger's trumpet looked like. He always made a secret of the technique and appearance of his organized trumpet. The first dated trumpet, as far as I know, is the trumpet by Ignaz Bauer, Prague, dated from 1817. It's in Berlin in the museum. This trumpet has 4 keys, but on closer inspection, one can see that the 4th key has a different design. So it probably also had 3 keys originally. The 3rd key was added later. Thanks, Sabine, for this picture. A friend has copied such a trumpet for me. I can play a chromatic scale without problems. This is a long natural trumpet in E flat. I have 3 keys. So everything of the Haydn concerto can be played on this. So the high register is easy possible with the keys. But already for the concerto of Johann Nepomuk Hummel, these 3 keys are not enough. If you want to play chromatically below the 4th partial, the low C, you need at least 4, if not 5 keys. A typical trumpet for the Hummel concerto could be the undated instrument from the Vienna Museum. I played and recorded the Haydn concerto with a copy of Rudolf Tutz based on this trumpet from Vienna. That is the original, and this is my copy. They are about looking the same. It's different, it's interesting. This you play with the right hand, this you have to play with the left hand, and it's a different order of keys. So it's every trumpet is different. We have here there's another one, 5-key trumpets, and they're all different. So, and you have to make a fingering chart for every instrument, or try to understand it. The research of Jaroslav Ruček, Sabine Klaus, Robert Appel, myself, and others have shown that the key trumpet, as I mentioned at the beginning, was played long into the 19th century, parallel and simultaneously with other types of trumpet, such as natural trumpet, various forms of the valve trumpet, the slide trumpet, and the keyed bugle. This later trumpet was also played in other tunings, especially in E, E flat, D, and C. For this purpose, the same body of the trumpet was used, and the respective tuning was achieved by attaching both. In my experience, the key does not work as well in different tunings, especially not in C. It is no longer possible to use the same keys for the same notes, especially the first key. And therefore, on this later trumpets, and we have one there, what Stan is playing later, the first 2 keys are very close together, and this is not key 1 and 2, it's more key 1A and 1B, and then comes 2. So you need another first key for low C trumpet. A very interesting thing for me is this picture. You see on this picture 2 trumpets on the right, and as you can see, they are absolutely the same design. They are both by Eduard Bauer, Prague. The one is owned by Jaroslav Ruček, the other is in vermilion in the museum. And if you see the third one, that's in vermilion, and it's again the same size and the same looking. It's the same instrument. 3 identical instruments by the same maker. And interesting is that this maker made his master around 1837, 38. So these 3 trumpets are made around 1840. There must have been a production of key trumpet this late. The mouthpiece plays a special room, which is often underestimated, although the cup shape, the bore, and especially the transition from the cup to the bore usually remains hidden. An image of the cross-section of the mouthpiece shows the critical elements. Here you see a picture from the method by Nemetz, and as far as I know, it's one of the very, very few pictures which shows how the mouthpiece has to look like. And this transition where the sharp corner is absolutely important for key trumpet, also for baroque trumpet, of course. In the collection of my friend who made these 2 trumpets, we found a mouthpiece connected with a B-flat trumpet, but it looked exactly like this. And he copied this mouthpiece, and it has a bore of 5.2 millimeters, so it's huge, but it plays very good up to the highest register. Today we know more and have more good mouthpiece copies, so to make a good trumpet, to make a key trumpet sound great again. And if you play a key trumpet, I think we should try to play original mouthpieces or copies of this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Friedemann. Hello, I'm Robert Appel. I'm a musicologist. Thank you, sir. Let's try that again, now that I can actually speak into the mic. So my name's Robert Apple. I am a musicologist from the United States and a colleague of Friedemann Immer and Stanley. And I'm going to be talking a bit about some either previously unknown key trumpet solo literature or pieces that are so obscure that really only people who are sitting in this room probably know about them. So, despite being the first practical fully chromatic trumpet and the instrument for which the Haydn and Hummel trumpet concertos were composed, several common misconceptions about the keyed trumpet and its music came into being over the course of the 20th century. These misconceptions included the ideas that the keyed trumpet was only employed as a solo instrument, that it did not find widespread acceptance during its period of use, that it had little music composed for it, and that it was quickly replaced by the valved trumpet. However, over the past 20 years or so, a renewed interest in the keyed trumpet and its music has been steadily growing amongst a small but dedicated number of specialists. Thanks to them, several of whom are seated in this room, we now have numerous excellent recordings of key trumpet music performed on the original instrument, know much more about the music and method books written for the key trumpet, and understand far more about its development, including, as already stated by Professor Immer, the fact that it continued to be built into the 1840s and was even played into the 1850s in some places, decades after the invention of the valved trumpet. My PhD dissertation, titled The Music Composed for the Keyed Trumpet, builds upon the recent work of Rocek, Klaus, and Steiger, and others, and includes an appendix that catalogs 720 works with keyed trumpet, of which 676 have survived to modern day. These pieces are of a variety of types and include pedagogical pieces, solo works, harmonie musique, chamber pieces, works for wind and brass band, orchestral dances, Italian operas, and church pieces. The existence of this much larger body of works firmly puts to rest the notion that the key trumpet had little music composed for it and strongly suggests that it was much more widely employed than previously thought. Even more importantly, this newly rediscovered repertory can serve as a body of evidence from which to draw new conclusions regarding how, where, when, and by whom the keyed trumpet was employed, and an examination of it can help provide a fuller and more complete understanding of the instrument's legacy and place in music history. While the 27 extant keyed trumpet solo works that I document in my dissertation only make up a small part of the keyed trumpet's surviving repertory, and most of those are less technically demanding than the Haydn and Hummel trumpet concertos, some are still quite challenging and well-composed works that deserve to be added to the trumpet's modern concert repertory. With this in mind, Professor Immer and I have recently released our editions of two of the more notable examples of obscure or previously unknown keyed trumpet solos, which we think will be of interest to both modern and period performers. The first of these that I would like to discuss today is the Divertimento per la tromba con chiavi in re by Trenkovitz, which is the earliest firmly datable extant Italian solo work for key trumpet, of which I am aware, and the only Italian multi-movement work for solo key trumpet and orchestra that I know to have survived. It is preserved in a manuscript score dated March 4th, 1828, held in the Verdi Conservatory's music collection in Milan. Formally speaking, the piece is closer in structure to what one might think of as a three-movement concertino rather than a divertimento. The first movement is a foreshortened sonata form with no proper recapitulation that instead moves to the piece's second movement via connecting material. Its second movement is an adagio that is reminiscent of a bel canto cavatina, and its final movement is a theme and variation that ends with an allegro molto coda. While the divertimento solo part is not as difficult as either the Hummel or Haydn trumpet concertos, it is still one of the more challenging solo works composed for the key trumpet, as it often asks the soloist to navigate complex harmonic progressions and requires good fingering technique in order to execute its more virtuosic passages. Unfortunately, I have found no biographical information about the divertimento's composer, Trenkovitz, though there is a strong likelihood, given his surname, that he may have been one of the many Czech military musicians that were stationed in Italy as part of Austro-Bohemian occupational forces at the end of the Napoleonic Wars. I have also found no evidence that points to which key trumpeter Trenkovitz wrote his divertimento. But given that the piece's manuscript dates from 1828 and it was most likely performed in Milan, there are a number of likely candidates. One is Joseph Tomaszka, the first known key trumpet soloist in Italy, who was a member of an Ulan cavalry regiment band stationed in Milan at the time. Tomaszka began performing as a key trumpet virtuoso at La Scala around 1823 and went on to become a regular member of the La Scala Opera Orchestra, serving as its prima tromba from 1824 to 1831. The other likely candidate is Giuseppe Uraldi, who served on and off as the prima tromba of La Scala from 1830 to 1837, and eventually held the position on a more permanent basis from 1844 to 1848. He was also one of the most well-known and successful key trumpeters in Italy, who wrote several published works for the key trumpet, including his 1835 method for keyed and valve trumpet, which has the distinction of being the keyed trumpet method to remain in print the longest, with Ricordi's 1844 reprinting of it being the last published pedagogical work for the instrument. I would now like to invite Stan Curtis and Pedro Sperandio to come forward to perform parts of the work on keyed trumpet using Friedemann and my edition's keyboard reduction. While they're setting everything up. For the sake of time, they will not be able to perform the entirety of the piece, but rather will perform the exposition of the first movement, leaving out the orchestral introduction at the beginning, then the entirety of the second movement, and finishing with the theme, second variation, and coda of the last movement. Gentlemen. All right, so the other key trumpet solo work that we have produced a modern edition of is the Introduction and Polonaise by Josef Höfner, which is one of the most well-written and difficult solo works composed for the instrument. Of course, this is my opinion, but I've also attempted to play it, and Stan does it far better than I do. Anyways, where was I? It is also the only piece for solo key trumpet and orchestra to be published before the 20th century. The piece survives as 5 distinct versions, 2 that were authored by Höfner himself, and 3 created later by Josef Keil, of which 2 are for valve trumpet and 1 for flugelhorn. We've included an appendix with all 4 versions of the solo part that are for trumpet as part of our edition. But we have not included the flugelhorn version because it is essentially identical to the one that Kyle made for F trumpet. No need to be redundant. Kyle knew Höfner personally, having studied horn at the Prague Conservatory concurrently with him from 1813 to 1817. In 1826, Kyle became the Prague Conservatory's first professor of early valve trumpet and valve trombone. He is best known today for his role in the development of the double piston and rotary valve, and for composing the first known solo work for valve trumpet, his Variationen für die Trompete in F, shown here. All right, I forgot to switch to the slide, but that's okay. All right, so the earliest version of Höfner's Introduction and Polonaise is most likely the one for solo trumpet and D in orchestra that survives as an undated set of manuscript parts held in the Czech National Museum. While the solo part to this earliest version of the work is marked tromba in D solo and not specifically indicating keyed or valve trumpet, it appears to have been written with the limitations of the former in mind. The most important of these being the key trumpet's limited practical lower register, which only goes down to written G below middle C, as opposed to that of the early 3-valve trumpet, which goes down to the written F sharp an octave below the lowest playable note on most 3-valved modern trumpets. Thus, Professor Immer and I believe that the work was most likely originally composed for the keyed trumpet, but that Höfner, who was no doubt aware of the fact that any keyed trumpet part could easily be played on the valve trumpet, wisely left the decision as to which instrument to perform the piece on up to the soloist. This conclusion is further supported by the title page of what I believe to be the second oldest version of the work, a set of printed parts held in the Czech National Library. This second version was first advertised by Marco Berra in the October 3, 1833 editions of the Allgemeine Musikalische Anzeiger and Wiener Zeitung, and its title page states that the piece was for chromatische oder Klappentrompete, valved or keyed trumpet. This printed version is very similar to the earliest version just discussed, with Höfner making only a few changes to the work for publication. These included adjusting the orchestra's instrumentation, deleting 2D material from the solo part, and writing a new cadenza between the first and second movements. Given that the orchestra of this version includes a pair of valve trumpets, and that Berra had already begun selling a trumpet with 3 double piston valves, with improvements invented by Kyle, and a fingering chart to go along with it around 1831, it is most likely that the published version of the work was created with the needs of Kyle and his students in mind. I would like to once again invite Stan Curtis and Mr. Sperancio back up to the stage to perform the introduction from the 1833 published version of the work's solo part on keyed trumpet with the keyboard reduction that Kyle made for his arrangements that I will be talking about in a bit. So while we regret not being able to present the work in its entirety here today due to time constraints, those interested in hearing the entire 1833 printed version performed on key trumpet with full orchestral accompaniment are in luck, as and I hope I'm saying this correctly, Dabringenhaus und Grimm will soon be releasing a recording of the work performed by Pedro Rosa, who will be presenting tomorrow, performed with Caterva Musica on the album La Arte del Virtuoso Volume 2. Though I've yet to find evidence of Höfner's introduction in Polonaise being publicly performed on the keyed trumpet, according to the Wiener Zeitung on December 23, 1833, Josef Stopanek, a trumpet and a trombone student of Keil's, performed a Polonaise für die chromatische Trompete von Höfner as part of a Große Akademie given by students of the Prague Conservatory. Unfortunately, however, since Höfner composed more than one Polonaise for trumpet, the one we have been discussing, and a completely different work for early valve trumpet held in the Czech National Museum, it cannot be said with certainty which of these works was performed on the 1833 Academy, but given the close proximity of this performance to the publication of Höfner's Introduction in Polonaise, it was most likely that work. What I think to be the third oldest version of the Introduction in Polonaise survives as a manuscript score for solo trompeta in D, an orchestra in the Czech National Museum. Though undated, this manuscript score may have been used during the December 23, 1833 performance given by Stopanek, since the score's orchestral parts are essentially identical to the version published by Bera. This version's solo part, however, includes several significant alterations that make it more difficult to play on the keyed trumpet. The most substantial of these are added passage work and chromatic ornamentation, and the rewriting of several passages to include written F sharps below middle C, which, as Friedemann has already noted, is a note you generally have to bend into existence on the keyed trumpet. Since Keil made similar alterations when arranging other solo works originally for keyed trumpet, for early valve trumpet, valve trombone, and flugelhorn for use at the Prague Conservatory, including Höfner's Adagio in 3 variations for solo keyed trumpet and harmony, and the Divertimento currently attributed to Josef Fiala, he is most likely responsible for the changes made to the third version's solo part. Presumably, Keil made these alterations in order to demonstrate the superior technical capabilities of his valved instruments over those of the keyed trumpet. The latest surviving versions of Höfner's Introduction in Polonaise are arrangements of the work made by Keil for early valve trumpet in F and B-flat flugelhorn with keyboard reduction, which survive in an undated manuscript held in the Prague Conservatory's archives. These latest versions appear to have been based on the third version just discussed, as their solo parts are almost identical to that of the third version, albeit with a few differences in articulation markings and, of course, being transposed into keys that better fit those instruments. It is difficult to date these later versions of the Höfner Polonaise, but we can say that the arrangement for early valve trumpet in F was completed by 1843, as it appears among the works for trumpet and trombone documented in the first inventory of the Prague Conservatory's holdings, dated 1843, and the version for flugelhorn may have been created as early as 1852, the year that Keil began teaching that instrument at the conservatory as well. Now, to give you all a chance to orally compare part of the 1833 printed version of the work to one of the later versions created by Keil, Stan and Pedro will be performing the introduction again, but this time they will be performing the version arranged for the early valve trumpet in F by Keil on that instrument. So, definitely quite a bit more flashy. I always got the sense that there was a little bit of one-upmanship going on there. In any case, it is most likely that Kyle's arrangements of Herfner's Introduction and Polonaise and Adagio in Three Variations, and the divertimento currently attributed to Fiala for early valve trumpet, valve trombone, and flugelhorn remained in the Prague Conservatory's pedagogical repertory until at least 1867, the year that Kyle finally retired from teaching at the conservatory. Kyle's arrangements of these three key trumpet works represent an unmissing link between the solo music composed for the key trumpet and that performed on the early valve brasses that later replaced it, and their existence further builds a case for the transition from keys to valves not being a clean and immediate break as some still believe, but rather one of overlapping and gradual change. Professor Immer and my editions of the two solo works we have presented here today, as well as the other key trumpet pieces published as part of the edition's Immer Key Trumpet Music Series, including our recently released edition of Kyle's arrangement of the Romanza from Mozart's Fourth Horn Concerto for trumpet and piano, are available for purchase at this year's Symposium or via Martin Smith's web store. As I stated earlier, the solo works that we have presented here only represent a very small part of the newly rediscovered key trumpet repertory that I discuss in my PhD dissertation. It is my hope that my dissertation, which is available via ProQuest, and our editions of these works will encourage more trumpeters to try playing the key trumpet, help to correct some of the long-held misconceptions about the instrument and its music, and motivate musicians and scholars to reevaluate their views regarding the key trumpet's place in music history. Thank you very much for attending our presentation.